Well, hey guys and girls, I am here with Jason Ferris. He is an appraiser, primarily serving the Louisville market, but he does cover the entire state. So I wanted to bring him in to basically give a little bit of insight into what exactly is an appraisal, what to expect, what he does, what he doesn't do. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how long you've been doing this. Uh, just any general information, how to contact you if people were to have questions. And I'll let you just kind of take it away.
All right, thanks. Well, my name's Jason Ferris. I'm a certified general appraiser in Kentucky. I also hold certifications for Ohio and Indiana. And that basically means that I can appraise any piece of real estate in those three states. And so our firm does commercial and residential appraisals. And I've been doing this for about 17 years. We got started in '03, and it's interesting that this timing is like this because in '03 we were in probably the best residential market ever, and that led to a bubble, and then we had a recession between basically '08 and 2012. So it's pretty interesting to see that we're kind of in a repeat pattern now where I think we're going to see a big shift in the real estate markets. But as an appraiser, we primarily report what we see in the market. So I think the misconception might be that we give our opinion of value and that it's very subjective, or it relies on our own opinions, and that's not really the case. Appraisals are objective, meaning we analyze data. It's a lot of math and analysis of mathematical data, and that gets applied so that we can go through the appraisal process.
So yeah, that's what leads me to really one of the first questions I wanted to ask is what exactly is an appraisal? Because I think a lot of times people will get confused. They'll hear the word inspection, so they will sometimes confuse home inspection with an appraisal and what the purpose really is of the difference between the two. So can you kind of talk about just really what the general definition is of an appraisal?
Yeah, the best way to describe it, I think, is that appraisers walk through properties like a buyer walks through properties. So a home inspector is going to give you a much more detailed analysis of just the subject property, and they're going to inspect all the physical components of that property, whether it be the dishwasher or the furnace or all of the things that they inspect. An appraiser is attempting to reconcile a value of that property by looking at the subject property and all its attributes and comparing that against the market. So if we take a house, for instance, and it's listed on the market, the first analysis is done by the listing agent in what's called a CMA. So that CMA, or I think it's competitive market analysis, if I can remember right. That's somewhat of a mini appraisal where you're looking at all of the listings competing against that subject property on the market, and then seeing where it shakes out. So if in a stable market, you should have three other listings within 10 or 15% of the listing price of your house. And we do the same thing when we do an appraisal of the property, except for we're relying mostly on closed sales. So generally for a typical subdivision property, we're going to look at the last 3 to 6 months of sales, and we're going to find houses that are the most comparable to the subject property. So for instance, if you've got a ranch on a basement, you're going to want to try to find other ranch houses with basements that have sold in the last 3 to 6 months. And everyone knows the general or the golden rule of real estate, which is location, 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 and that's absolutely true. So you want to try to stay in your neighborhood if you can, and then move out in distance to find similar neighborhoods to compare to yours.
So, what would you say, or do you want to be clear that an appraisal is not?
Okay, so that's a good question. So an appraisal is not a home inspection. And let me clarify that a little. Well, actually, a little secret about appraising is that every answer in appraising is it depends.
Yeah,
That's the answer to
obviously,
every
yeah, because
question.
if it's an FHA, if it's a VA, there's
Right.
different. Yeah,
Yeah, so that's where I was going to go is that FHA and VA are loans that are HUD loans or the Housing and Urban Development federal agency. And so they have what's called minimum property standards or minimum property requirements that they want every house um, to have that's a standard above what you're going to typically see if you go get a conventional loan. And the reason being is that when you get an FHA or a VA loan, FHA and VA are actually guaranteeing your mortgage should you default. Whereas in a conventional mortgage, there's no one to guarantee that. So, for instance, when I purchased my house in 2016, I'm a veteran, so I was able to get a VA loan. The appraiser actually came and said that the house needed to have a hand railing going down to the basement because that's a pretty standard
yeah,
minimum property requirement. And the interesting thing is that when that appraisal got sent to the VA, the reviewer looked at all of the photographs and actually came up with another requirement about a relief valve on the water heater.
yeah.
So it's not just the appraiser going down the checklist and whether they're going to be hard or soft on a property. There's actually another reviewer somewhere in Washington D.C. that's looking at that report and making sure that the appraiser hit all of the check boxes. The other thing is that an appraisal is a value opinion and it's really a snapshot in time. So there's two components of the value besides the actual dollar amount. One is the effective date, and two is the marketing exposure time. Okay, so if I say that a property has a value of $125,000, I'm saying that that $125,000 was the value on the day that I saw it. So if the house burns down the next day, that doesn't change my value opinion because it was as of an effective date. Now, the other thing that goes along with it is we're saying that that value of $125,000 is based on a standard marketing and exposure time. And without going too much into the appraiser nerd world and details, typically we're going to say 3 to 6 months. I'm going to talk to my local realtors. I'm going to look at my MLS, and I'm going to see that the days on market for this neighborhood is typically 90 to 180 days, and therefore my value is predicated on that marketing time. So the interesting thing, when appraisers get together and we have a big appraiser party and we tell appraiser jokes, is that yes, that $125,000 ranch could be worth $200,000 with a marketing time of 10 years. Right? You see,
Yeah,
everything has to go together. Those three things.
yeah. Eventually, you might find that person that would pay that, but that doesn't necessarily mean typically that that's what that's going to bring.
Right.
So, what do you think is probably the biggest misconception about what an appraiser does?
I would say that it's really not the appraiser's opinion of a property's value. It's really the analysis of the market, which is really a math equation. We're finding, for instance, that same ranch property with a basement. If we stay in the same neighborhood and we find ranch houses with basements that are a little bit smaller, and then we find a couple that are a little bit larger, or maybe we find some that are not as updated, and then we find a couple that are more updated. That bracket should tell you your value range. So if you do the analysis part on the front end of the report correctly, the number just works itself out. So for instance, as long as I'm picking the comparables correctly and they're truly comparable to my property, it really just tells you the answer. Now we do a bunch of fancy appraiser math, but really, the comparable selection should tell you your answer.
So, to kind of talk a little bit more about comparables, we've thrown that out there a lot, and that obviously is, I know exactly what it means. You know exactly what it means. Can you expand on that a little bit for somebody that is buying a house maybe for a first time, what you mean by comparable?
Sure. So you want to stay as close geographically as you possibly can. So location, location, location is number one. Two is square footage. You want to try to stay similar to your square footage. Generally, we start with 20% smaller and 20% larger. So, if you have 1,000 square foot ranch, you want to try to find comparables that are 800 to 1,200 square feet. If your subject has a basement, you want to try to have a basement. If your house is typically updated, you want to try to find houses that are similar to that. The typical problem that we run into with residential properties, and a lot of this is because of the HGTV years for the last decade and a half, where people have seen houses in California where you spend $40,000 on a kitchen and you get a $100,000 return. Here in the Midwest, we don't see that. So cost doesn't always equal value, but that works both ways. So for instance, maybe I've got a buddy that's going to help me put on a deck and it costs me $2,000. But if I had to hire a contractor, maybe that same deck is $5,000. The deck didn't change, and the person buying the house has no idea how much I spent on that deck. So as long as I spent, $2,000 or less, I should see a positive return. But I can overspend, get the same deck, and not get a return. Kitchens and baths are obviously the number one place to spend money. I think everybody pretty much understands that by now. We've all seen Property Brothers plenty of times. So, that's I would say one of the big misconceptions out there.
Now, is there any type of specific improvements whenever it comes to the kitchen or the bathrooms, to where they may see an actual close to dollar return? Or is there just really no correlation between those two, that it's just a matter of the comps and the way that they work out? Or do you see truly, like, where if you spend $10,000 on updating a kitchen, which probably wouldn't go real far, but
Right.
would actually get that $10,000 in return? And also too, I'll let you go ahead and throw this in with that discussion, is I think a lot of times one of the biggest ones that people don't quite realize is a swimming pool in our market, in Kentucky. If we were in Florida, something to that effect, maybe you see that bigger response. But I think a lot of times people will think, well, gosh, I spent, $30,000 putting that pool in, so I just added $30,000 of value. But that also, goes into what they do on the inside of the house as well. That, if you've done a $20,000 bathroom, that's fantastic. That is everything that you ever wanted and you've enjoyed it. You may not see $20,000 worth of additional value.
Yeah. I just appraised a property this week where the couple had spent $133,000 on an enclosed patio. So, they're not going to get that return, but they've enjoyed it the last 5 or 10 years, and it's a really cool space. It's really nice. But that worked out to be about $250 a square foot. in a market where the houses were selling at $175 a square foot. But let's knock out the pool issue real fast. So pools are the same as pole barns, that sort of, any of those big expenses. If we were in Florida and you did not have a pool and it was not screened in, I would probably make a negative adjustment to your house, right?
Yeah.
But here in the Midwest, in-ground pools never see a positive return. So I would say that the average pool installation is probably $50,000 to $60,000. By the time you get the pool, you do the patio, you do all of the landscaping around it, you get the equipment, all that stuff. And I would say that probably in the best neighborhoods in Louisville, I'm probably adjusting $15,000 or $20,000 if someone has a pool.
That's probably on the high end, right? I mean,
definitely
like
on
in
the
an
high end.
Ashland, like our market, you may see 10,000.
Yeah, and so the idea about in-ground pools is interesting, and I didn't really quite understand it until I had kids, but I would not have wanted an in-ground pool at my house because I'm not worried about my kids falling in. It's all the neighborhood kids coming and potentially falling in or getting hurt. I've got to add a fence. Here in the county that I lived in, you had to have a fence around the pool, and I was worried about additional liability. So I would not even consider a house with an in-ground pool to buy when I moved from Ohio to Kentucky. Other people say, well, I've got teenagers, and if I can keep them at the house because I've got a pool, that'll keep them out of trouble. And if their friends are coming to our house, at least I know where my kids are. So you've got that split of people who see in-ground pools as something valuable, and there's a group of, let's say 50% of the people who don't want one, and would see it as a negative. Of course, there's maintenance costs, but there's really costs to maintain everything. And I don't know if I remember the first part. Oh, I do remember. Okay. On the inside, I would say that the first thing to do, if you're thinking about selling your property, the first thing to do is have a realtor that come to your house and walk through it and tell you what's wrong with it. That's, I think, the best thing that you could do. They're going to tell you to declutter. They're going to tell you that, the drywall damage needs to be fixed. The bathroom's a little grungy, whatever. And I don't know if you do that or not, but I would imagine that you're trying to put the best product forward to the market. But I would say that the homeowner, if they're able to be critical of themselves, they need to walk through their house like a buyer and say, what's the overall condition of this property? Because appraisers, we don't adjust for a tile backsplash, and we don't adjust for a glass door on a shower, and we don't adjust for a disposal in a sink. The market is not that sophisticated to be able to line item those things out. So an appraiser is going to walk through and say, what's the overall condition of this property? So if you've got, and I see this a lot, where you've got your standard 8-4, 2.5 bath property, your 2-story properties. The master bedroom and bath are on the first floor, so the parents don't usually go upstairs because that's where the kids are. And so what happens is the first floor gets updated and renovated, and the second floor doesn't get touched a lot. So I would say that if your first floor is updated and you've got a spectacular kitchen and half bath, but then you go upstairs and it's older carpet and maybe original tile in the bathroom, it actually takes away, because someone's going to walk up those stairs and say, great, now I've got to redo all this. And they're going to take that money off the price. So I would say overall condition, making sure that everything is updated and renovated together is more important than one specific piece, like a backsplash or a new refrigerator or something. But bedrooms and living rooms and family rooms basically need to have flooring and paint, and that's pretty easy to do. Kitchens and bathrooms are what take all the time to renovate, and of course they disrupt your life while you're living there if you're trying to renovate it while you live there. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, and it kind of you kind of started down this path of too that led to the next question: is there any improvements that people do to their home that can actually have the opposite effect of actually hurting the value?
Yeah,
One obvious one is that if you say you have a 3 bedroom, 1.5 bath house, a little ranch style thing, and you make that only 2 bedrooms, does that affect, the way that you look at the property and the way that you're able to actually appraise it? Because I know it's based off square footage, but bedrooms and baths play in there.
yeah. If you have any Tennessee volunteers, anything in your house that hurts your value, that's number one. That's a good rule. Um, I would say that definitely. Number the number of bedrooms minimum should be three. That's generally what everybody's looking for is 3 bedrooms. So if you have one kid or no kids, and you take your 3 bedroom property and you turn it into a 2 bedroom property, you now have a functional problem because the market is expecting 3 bedrooms out of your size house if your house is typical for the neighborhood. Now, there's some older neighborhoods in Lexington and Louisville, probably in Ashland, where houses are 800 or 900 square feet and they have 2 bedrooms, and that's fine, and that's totally fine. But if you're in a neighborhood with all 3 bedrooms, you expect to see a negative adjustment on an appraisal of your property because you've now eliminated a big chunk of the buyers out there.
So, one of the big things, and we've said the word several different times on here, and that's basement.
Okay.
So, can you talk about how value is assessed, uh, both from yours is independent of whether they're selling it or buying it, but
Right.
taking that into consideration that there's some people that are going to be watching this that are thinking about listing their property, and it's going to give them ideas and things they need to consider. Some people are going to be buying properties and they're like, oh great, that's got an extra 1,100 square feet down in the basement. So therefore, if it's a typical ranch with a full basement, then that's twice the square footage.
Right.
In
Right.
reality, yeah, maybe it's that, but as far as value, how is that affected?
Okay. So I would say that 15 years ago, there was a big uh, gap between how appraisers were counting square footage and how realtors were counting square footage. Because the MLS systems, when I first started, only had one spot, and that was just living area, and that was one number. And so, uh, if I was a realtor and I was marketing the property, yeah, I would want to put the bigger number on there if they had finished square footage in the basement. But over the years, the education of appraisers and realtors has come a lot closer. So we're all reporting square footage now the correct way. The first rule is above grade, and below grade is below grade, and that never changes. And basically, the rule is that any part of the level of the house that's below grade, it's all below grade. So even if you have a walkout basement, it's still below grade space. So on the appraisal form, and most people have seen an appraisal form by now, on page 2, where you've got the grid, where you've got your subject on the left, and then you've got your three comparables down the thing. Everyone's pretty much seen those. Right in the middle, you'll see gross living area, and that refers to living area above grade. And then the next line, it'll say basement, and that's all of the square footage below grade. And then the third line says finished basement area, and that's all of the finished basement. Okay, so if you have a 1,200 square foot ranch and a full basement, that means you've got 1,200 square feet of basement space. And then 800 square feet of that is finished. Maybe you got a family room and a bath and a bedroom. So on the appraisal, it'll say 1,200 for living area, 1,200 for basement, and 800 for finished. And the reason we want to do that is because below grade space has a different value per square foot than above grade space. So when we're doing our comparables across that grid, we want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. And it works in reverse too. You wouldn't want me comparing a ranch that sold on your street and say that it has 1,800 square feet and subtract money because yours is only 1,200 because they had 1,200 plus 600. So it works both ways.
So now, what's typically the difference in value? And I understand that is different per market, so different markets are maybe going to have a little bit more value. But as
Yeah.
a general rule, what can people expect to get value-wise out of their basement?
So
Or is there a typical value?
yeah. Well, the answer is of course that it depends. That's
Yeah.
always the first answer that any appraiser should ever give you. But I would say a reasonable ratio would be that if the above grade space is $100 a square foot, your basement with plus finish should probably be worth half of that. So that would mean that the unfinished part's worth, you know, $20 a square foot, and your finished part's worth $30 a square foot, or some amount of ratio there. But that's not a bad rule. And actually, mathematically, you can do it if you take 5 or 6 sales in a neighborhood, adjust out all the differences, then you can actually mathematically work out what it is. But that's not unreasonable to say that, if it's $100 a square foot and I finish my basement, I should gain $10 or $20 a square foot out of that basement space. But I wouldn't rely on that if I was a homeowner. I would either get an appraiser to appraise my property ahead of time, or if I'm planning on listing it, then work with the listing agent to get
At
those
least
numbers.
have that CMA or something
Yeah.
that's talking about what they're actually seeing in that particular market.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want the biggest, nicest house in the neighborhood. So you need to understand that if the neighborhood tops out at $150,000, don't think that because you are so great at picking paint colors that yours should be 175. You want to make sure you're within those limits, because you can get a contract for any amount, but it also has to get through the appraisal process. So
So, and kind of going to that, who is your actual employer?
okay.
If somebody gets an appraisal done, granted, a seller could call you, but for a typical purchase, who's your employer?
So our client is, if we're talking about residential mortgages, our client is most of the time the bank, the lender. So the interesting thing is that my confidentiality relationship is with my client, and it's very difficult sometimes when a homeowner writes a check for $400 or $500 or $600 for an appraisal, and then they call the appraiser to discuss, and the appraiser says, "I'm sorry, I can't discuss the appraisal with you." So that's a difficult conversation to have. It's not that we can't talk to the homeowner. It's that it needs to go back through the client, back through the bank. In a purchase situation, that can be very frustrating because the time doesn't always work out. But I think for the most part, if the homeowner or the buyer has a legitimate reason to request a revision to the appraisal, most appraisers that I know are pretty good about being receptive to that, getting that turned around and getting that back. Because as appraisers, we want to have the right answer. And more importantly, we're in business and we want to make sure that our client, the bank, can rely on us and understands that we're easy to work with. So, appraisers, have kind of a tough reputation, but it's because of that confidentiality relationship. So sometimes I can send a quick email to the bank and say, hey, can you just email me back quick permission to discuss the appraisal with the homeowner? I don't think I've ever gotten a no response. I think they've always said, yeah, that's fine, go ahead. And then if there's any revisions to the appraisal that need to be done, just communicate that back to the bank. Because in 17 years, I have missed a half bathroom. I have thought that a door went to a closet when it really went to a bedroom. You know, it's just out of the volume of inspections that we
So
do.
you're human, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this week I inspected a 4,800 square foot house, historic home in the Highlands, which is a neighborhood here in Louisville. And this house was actually a combination of 3 houses over the years that had been built onto and combined. And it was really, really nice. And the realtor had met me at the property and handed me a sketch that another appraiser had done. It was a really good sketch. So I put it in my folder, thanked him, and then went on with my inspection. And the original part of the home had an unfinished cellar. So I went down, took pictures, measured, and then came up and got back in my car and went back to my office. I pulled out the other appraiser's sketch just to compare square footages with my measurements, and there's a whole finished basement on the appraisal or on the sketch. So I thought, ugh. So I had to call the agent, go back out. Luckily, the property was vacant. So I didn't, of course, it was this week. So we had masks and gloves and all kinds of stuff. And then because the stairs to that finished part of the basement were in the third house that had been combined and was behind a door that I thought was a closet. So, we make mistakes. It happens. But most time in business, if you just say, yeah, I made that mistake, I'll get it corrected and move on. People are, generally receptive to that.
Yeah. So one of the last questions I want to kind of to finish up on is, what do you wish people knew that are selling their house that they would have done for whenever you come in to do the appraisal, whether it be a vacant house or one that is occupied? What gives them the most opportunity for success to get the value out of their home, so that way whenever you come in, everything's kind of ready to go?
So I think that the best thing that a homeowner can do during the life of their ownership of that home is keep just a notebook and write down the improvements that they've done to the house. If you think about it, I can't possibly retain every detail of a property when I'm walking through in 15 to 20 minutes. But if the homeowner has a list where they basically have the year, the renovation project, and a price range, that's really, really helpful. And a lot of the times that helps me when I'm writing the report. So for instance, if my house is at the top of the price range and there's really no comparables that are a lot better, so I'm not bracketed on my quality, and I need to show the bank that I understand why my property is at the top of that price range, I can also say, sometimes I'll scan the listing that the homeowner gives me, and it'll start with 2006 replaced roof, $40,000. 2010 renovated kitchen, $50,000. And so I'm able to go back and kind of tell that story in my report as to say, why am I valuing this at the top of the range? It's because that quality is at the top. And so I would say that the best thing that any homeowner can do, whether it's for a refinance or to sell the house, is to keep track of those projects. It doesn't have to be exact, and they can say, replaced roof 4 years ago, replaced windows 3 years ago, updated flooring 2 years ago, replaced appliances in the kitchen, 5 years ago, finished basement 4 years ago. I mean, that's fine. It just allows the appraiser to have some more information And quite frankly, if the homeowner hands me a list, I'm to assume that that information is correct. So if it ever comes back later that I made, that information was not right, maybe the roof is actually 25 years old, then I can say, well, listen, the property owner gave this to me. And I would think as a buyer, that would be helpful too, just to have that additional documentation to say, listen, the sellers told us that the roof was replaced and it really wasn't. I think that's, rather than just relying on somebody told me that, it's actually in the appraisal. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, definitely want to thank you for taking some time today and covering a lot of questions. Hopefully we've covered everything. Is there anything you feel like we've missed, or anything that you feel like would be a good parting shot for people to keep in mind with an appraisal?
I would say just be realistic about your house. If you pay attention to the pricing in your neighborhood, you should have a good idea of what your house is worth. And if you're unsure, it's obviously good, and I'll just put a little plug in here. It's obviously good to have an appraisal done on your property ahead of time. I would say the second best thing you can do is to actually have your house inspected prior to listing it. I've done that with my last 3 houses. I've had the inspection report sitting on the table during the open house. So people could walk through, they could look at the inspection report. I wasn't at the inspection, so there's no, I'm not influencing them at all. But that really, I think, takes care of a lot of the little annoying problems that can be corrected before it gets written into a purchase contract. And then in the case of FHA, you've got to actually pay the appraiser to come back out and check all those items that are done. So I think, having an appraisal if you're not sure of your value, and definitely have a home inspection before you sell your house. That'd be my, top 2 items.
Okay. Well, great. Well, guys, this has been Jason Ferris. I'll let you go ahead. And again, if you have a Facebook page or blog or any phone numbers or anything like that, if people want to reach out to you directly and request an appraisal or just ask a question that they feel like you may be able to answer for them.
Sure. The best way is to go to our website, which is bellferris.com. That's BELLFERRIS.com. And we've got forms on there where you can request information. There's my email address is on there, phone number, that sort of thing. So that's the best way to get in touch with us.
Excellent. And again, guys, my name is Ryan Keeton. I'm with eXp Realty and the Keeton Group. If y'all have any questions that I can help with, certainly reach out to me, and I'll get you in touch with Jason as well if I'm not able to answer those. Thank you all.